Good evening, good morning, good whatever day it is. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the She Is Unleashed podcast, where faith meets fierce leadership and high performing women rise to their divine assignments with clarity, courage, and conviction. I'm your host, Dr. Mirriam Knight, a clinical psychologist, executive leadership strategist, and a prophetic voice for women who know they're called to impact the world without compromising their integrity. Y'all, I am so excited about today's episode because I know it is going to be an absolute soul stirring conversation for the woman who is in the season of elevation. Maybe God is opening some doors for you that you never imagined, and yet you find yourself thinking, how will I steward this well? How do I stay grounded in humility when the platform and pressure are growing? And our guest today, Dr. Daniela Peel, is a leader who knows this tension so well. She is the founder of the Heal Well Collective, a United Nations peace ambassador, and the author of Shattered Silence: Navigating Workplace Trauma and Thriving. And her mission, y'all, is to disrupt silence, heal invisible wounds, and equip leaders to thrive unapologetically, all while staying anchored in faith and purpose. Dr. Daniela, welcome to the She's Unleashed podcast. I am so excited to have you today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. Well, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey. Now, I know that we can't cover all of that, but hopefully, as we talk today, bits and pieces of the story will come together. But tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what's your heart, and what is your mission before we dig into all these questions.
Absolutely. Pretty much this space that I operate in is really born from lived experience. Experiencing burnout, loss. I am a woman in midlife, kind of transitioning myself, trying to figure a lot of things out. A lot of that just really stems from lived experience, and it really brought me to a point of creating the Heal Well Collective for women in mind, teaching them strategies and tools on how to heal well and thrive, not just professionally, but also personally. And so I do that through a framework I call my Pivot Well framework. We also have wellness retreats as well all over the world, really helping women, find their safe space, their healing space and community. And again, I just curate different trainings surrounding that professionally, as well as in the personal setting as well.
Okay, y'all. All these things that she's talking about, I'm going to have the links in the comments in the show notes so that you can make sure that you connect with her. But tell us a little bit about your personal journey. I got the opportunity to read a little bit of your story in a component of a book. And there's so much about, like you said, this is lived experience. This is the journey that you've walked through that has led you to curate these spaces to allow other women to heal. You're an advocate on many levels, in many different settings for women as a whole, and you're a voice for many who are voiceless, who cannot speak for themselves. But tell us a little bit about who the person you is before we talk about all these hats that you wear.
Absolutely, absolutely. I always call 2012 my transformative year. And the reason being is because that was the year I actually got divorced after being with my ex-husband 9.5, close to 10 years. So that was kind of I guess the jumping point for me, recognizing that I was in a marriage to a good person, good man, but I recognized for me, I was looking for him to fulfill voids that only
Mm.
God could. And so, as a person, I was looking for him to do those things. That was kind of like the first point going through divorce, which, if you've ever gone through that experience, it's very traumatic. Um, it takes a long time to heal from that, and you learn a lot about yourself in that process. So that was the first thing that happened. And immediately the following year, my dad decided to serve my mom divorce papers after 35 years of marriage on my 40th birthday. So I got the word on my actual birthday. And so that was really life changing as well, because at that point I had to help my mom really learn to navigate mental health. At
Mm-hmm.
that point in time, there was no closure for her. She had suicidal ideation. So I'm trying to navigate that and be supportive, and helping her in that process, while also learning simultaneously that the man that raised me was actually not my biological father. I actually learned through their divorce that I actually was adopted by my stepdad. And I then went on a journey to find my biological father, which I did find, and discovered I had two half siblings. But then also learned that I actually had a biological sister that was given up for adoption. And so all of this was happening simultaneously while I'm trying to heal through my divorce, my parents' divorce. At that time, my stepdad decided to disown myself and my brother. Of course, at the time, I thought he was my biological brother. He was actually my half brother. And so trying to navigate that while also dealing with my mom's mental health issues and trying to discover this whole new family, while also experiencing an aunt who had cancer. I had an uncle that died unexpectedly from a tragic accident. So it's like one thing after another. When the stuff was hitting the fan, it was literally hitting the fan. And I'm trying to figure these things out in my own healing while also trying to help support my mother. And then tragically, in 2017, in June, actually, I was the one that actually found my mother deceased in my home. She was scheduled to go to her weekly therapy group session and her meeting with her psychiatrist, things of that nature. And I was the one, unfortunately, that found her lifeless body. And so that was another, another thing that I was like having to heal from as well. So when you talk about a lived experience, I've experienced it as a child. I also was molested in fourth grade. So I've gone through a lot of things that most of your listeners and viewers have experienced. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
consider myself like, oh, she's this one, special person that's gone through all these things. I feel like as women, we've all have our own story of different things that we've gone through. And I think that was kind of what was birthed the Heal Well Collective. When my mom passed, literally, I heard God's voice download on me and say, "You're going to start a company. It's going to be called the Heal Well Collective, and you are going to help women in these life transitions and circumstances to heal based off of your own lived experience." And that's actually how it was birthed. I had no idea or desire or thought to ever start my own business, but God downloaded that on me based off my lived experience.
Wow. All this is taking place in a period of what? A year, 2 years?
Couple of years, yes.
Wow. Talk about pouring, like boom, 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 boom. And here
Yes.
you are. What I love about what you just said and what you just shared is it's a reminder to many women, like you said, who have experienced all the stuff, that that does not get to be the final narrative of our story. That does not get to be the conclusion of our narrative, but we get to pivot when we submit to the directive that God gives us. Because you could have said no.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You
And
could have.
honestly, I was like, am I qualified to do this work? Because I'm not a clinical psychiatrist or psychologist or therapist. I'm like, who's actually going to want to hear from me? What can I actually
Mm-mm.
contribute to help women? And that's actually not the case. You don't have to be those things in order to help others.
That is a key point, and I'm going to note that part. You don't have to be all those things to help others. God will use your story, God will use your journey, and what the enemy meant for evil, what the enemy
Mhm.
meant as a way to take you out, all those things that you've experienced. And I know somebody's listening that is saying, wow, that sounds like my story, or I've been through similar situations and it feels like I'm drowning. It feels like everything's trying to take me out. But you're saying, here I am on the other side of this journey, in this journey, and it didn't take me out, but I got to use in that moment something was birthed. A couple of episodes back, one of the speakers talked about wherever there's a birthing, wherever new beginnings come, there has to also be a closing and an ending. And we don't like to talk about the ending that leads to the birthing, but that's so key in what you just shared. Okay. So let's talk about these hats, the Heal Well Collective that was birthed from your own journey of loss, your own journey of trauma. Um, you created and you started creating spaces for other women to heal well. I know this is not in the script or in the notes, but tell us a little bit more about what healing well means for you.
I think for me, and let's be honest, healing well or healing at all, it's difficult, it's challenging, it's ugly, it's not easy. I think a lot of times when we think about it, a lot of things that we experienced, it didn't happen overnight. And so therefore healing cannot happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times when you work with professionals such as therapists, psychologists, or psychiatrists, which I do have a therapist, I'm not afraid to share that. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's important to kind of, shed the stigma surrounding receiving mental health help from a professional. But I recognize that in my journey, because I had so many things coming at me simultaneously, I needed someone to help me unpack
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And so for me, it was a combination of seeking help from a therapist who can help me walk through the emotions, because remember, I was still healing from my divorce, my parents' divorce. I was disowned by my dad. I found my my biological dad and some siblings. I eventually found my biological sister. So there was a lot of things coming at me simultaneously that I just did not know how to process and unpack at the same time. And so I think healing well for me looks like spiritual, being a woman of faith, tapping into my church community and my women's small group
Mm-hmm.
with therapy. But then it's also other things too that bring me joy. And I think for a lot of people, recognizing that healing looks different for different people, it could be, yoga, it could be exercise, it could be journaling, it could be therapy, reading, it could be a lot of different things for people. And so for me, it's a combination of a lot of different things that allow me to heal well and thrive. I get religious massages every 2 weeks. That is my, that's my thing. I need to relieve stress because I hold stress in my body. I recognize that. And I think also recognizing how your nervous system responds to trauma, stress, and different things. But I think for everyone, it does look differently. But for me, starting out, it started out in therapy. And in therapy, I recognized that I could get the foundational tools, but I needed something to kind of get into those dark, hidden places internally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where God really kind of stepped in and got into those secret places to really start the healing work. And sometimes you don't even know certain areas that you need to heal from. As you're going through the process, your triggers,
Absolutely.
those things come up. And then you start to realize, like, oh, wow, this is another area I need to get help in. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think for a lot of people, it's just recognizing it's a combination of different things. But for me, the biggest was faith and therapy at the same time.
Absolutely. And I love that you use the word foundational, because what I heard from your story too is that at the age of 40, when we're like saying 40 is when life really begins, right?
Right.
Is when you experienced a major like core identity crisis shift, that it wasn't even like a midlife crisis, it was a life crisis that completely obliterated your foundational core aspects of your identity, like who in the world am I at 40,
Yeah. And I think it's also important to recognize that, those significant life crises, there is no end or timetable. Like it can happen at any point. And I say that because I just turned 50 a week ago. And literally a year and a half ago, not only did I go through another life crisis shift, I was going through a toxic work environment, burnout, as well as perimenopause at the
Mm.
same time. So that's a different type of life crisis because we're talking physical and emotional and health wise simultaneously. And I had no clue that I was going through perimenopause and burnout, at the same time as the toxic work environment experience. So,
So you're saying it's not a once in a lifetime or it's not a one moment thing. It's we've got to understand that there's these shifts that keep happening throughout life, and we've got to be
mhm,
able to navigate those shifts and pivot. And the core component you said was faith and therapy at the same time,
mhm,
your personal relationship with God. And you said something really key. You said it is in your time with God that God found out, searched out those deeper places, those private places, those secret places, and dealt with some of the foundational core issues that most other people wouldn't even be aware of. Why was that so important? And I'm pivoting that towards especially the work that you do with women. Why was you doing your own individual deep healing work, correcting and reformulating that foundational part, so critical in the journey of what you do right now, what God has called you to do right now in the season?
Yeah, I think one of the really important things is to understand that you have to want to heal, right? Healing is not, it's not for the faint of heart. It is really difficult. And depending on your journey and the things you've experienced, it's more difficult for others, based on what the story is. But I think I recognized for me early on in therapy that, the therapy was helping, but it wasn't really getting into like the heart work, the internal stuff that was really deep rooted. And I recognized I need something more supernatural to help
Oh,
get in on the inside to help me with some of those traumas that only God could heal. And
yeah.
I recognized that, even though at that time I would say I was really new to the faith, I was really just learning. But one of my really good girlfriends, my best friend, was a strong woman in faith at the time, and she was the one that directed me to God and really seek out faith in our church that we attend now. But I knew I needed something more supernatural to really get in there because the therapy can only do so much.
Mhm.
It's those other things internally that I really needed supernaturally to get on the inside to help me really start to peel back those layers to heal. And really being open to the process. Some days you're like, I got this, I'm doing good, I'm healing. And other days you're like, I don't know if I can do this. And it's scary to look at those traumatic and hurtful things that you've experienced.
Mhm.
It could be terrifying and almost debilitating to try to, face those head on. But I think when you have the right community and you have God and you have support that looks like therapy with the right therapist, you can definitely get through that on to the other side.
How has you going through that, continuing to go through that, been instrumental in the healing work that you do with women?
I think it allows me to be very empathetic and compassionate, and non judgmental.
Hmm.
I think one of the really important factors for me in my healing was community was important, but having the right community and having a safe space where I wasn't judged and really supported is important. So it does allow me to have empathy and compassion for women. And it wants me, I want to be able to help women recognize that they can get to the other side.
Mhm.
And that there are resources and tools out there for that kind of healing, and it can be done.
Amen to that. Now, you are again an ambassador. You carry many spaces of advocacy for women. I want to talk a little bit about your book that is about disrupting silence. Why was that so important for you to birth this book, to write this book, to deliver on the download that God gave you? Why was that so critical for you?
I think for me, it was important because at the time of experiencing the toxic work environment, and just to kind of give some context, I was going through that for about a year, solid. And so it was things I was experiencing was like I would see the person send me an email and I would literally have an emotional response. My nervous system would
Mm,
respond just seeing the person's name in an email. This person would disrespect me in front of direct reports, talk negatively about me to fellow colleagues. I even remember for Christmas, this person sent me a box of cookies. I love chocolate. Anyone that knows me knows I love chocolate. When I tell you I had an allergic reaction to the cookies just from the thought that it came from him. And so for me, when you always go through the storm, you never see what God is doing, behind the
mm-hmm.
scenes or in the works, what's going on. You're just like, woe is me, things are terrible. But then eventually the light switch went on, and I was like, oh, God is trying to teach me something in this particular season. And what he taught me was that I was tying my identity to the job title because I was a leader, and I was tying that to the job title, and that's not who God says that we are. And so I had to learn that. And then I also had to learn that I needed to get back to the place of advocating for myself, speaking up for the things that were done wrong. And I did. I, spoke up, I advocated, I documented. Even when I made the choice to leave the company that I loved working for, I had been there for many, many, many years, almost a decade. I, went out on my own terms, professionally said what needed to be said. But I did that because I wanted to be able to have documentation that if additional things came up, there was a record of it. Um, and I had the opportunity to take the matters further, through other routes, and actually had an option to kind of pursue that further, but I chose not to because I felt like I recognized that that was part of what God had in store for me in my next chapter. And so
Mm,
once I made that decision to advocate for myself on my own terms, I decided to write the book as a means to help others. Because as I was sharing my story during that time, it was a lot of friends and colleagues experiencing toxic work environments as
yeah.
well. And then I think at that point in time too, in that during that period, I think we were hearing a lot of professionals, ending their life by suicide based off of those toxic work environments. So I really wanted it to be a tool to help others on what they can do and not suffer in silence like I did for a year. A year is way too long. So I talk about strategies, what you can do, and not waiting a year like I did. I think sometimes, and I think this was the other big lesson that God taught me too. Sometimes we will suffer in silence for a paycheck. And if we say that God is our provider, providing provision doesn't always look like a 8 to 5 or a 9 to 5 job. And so that was something else he taught me, is really strengthening my faith. And so when I left, I didn't have a job. I didn't, I had no source of income or anything like that. but he did provide provision, and it didn't look like a 9 to 5 job. And so he taught me a lot of things in that period of time, just recognizing my worth and my identity, and understanding that he's the one that provides provision, even though it doesn't always look like a 9 to 5.
Leaps of faith and trusting that God has your back, especially when he's leading you out of a situation. And I think that's key, like leaving well, leaving on your terms, and not there's decisions that you made along the way under God's guidance, that you didn't make any moves on your own. I'm hearing the voice of God throughout your journey, and even what you shared, that sounds like it's been coming out. It's coming out very clearly that every single move that you've been making has been in direct response to a directive from Him. Key component, your walk and your relationship with God and knowing His voice.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes, when you're going through the storm, sometimes you can't hear anything, because you're in the
Mhm.
midst of all of the chaos and, the fear. We do have fear and sometimes in the situations. But what I had to recognize with the manager that I was dealing with, that was creating the toxic work environment for me, is that he was a catalyst, a disruptor, because I had become too complacent in that environment to stay there when God was like, you're getting comfortable, so I'm going to make it uncomfortable so you can shift or pivot to what I have called you to be next. And when I tell you, I grieved leaving that job because, like I said, I was there almost 10 years. I
Mhm.
loved that job. I loved my colleagues and everything. And I would have never written my book, had I stayed. I would have never become a United Nations peace ambassador had I stayed. I would have not had a lot of different experiences traveling, speaking, engaged, like all the things that God has opened up for me after that. But that person, was a disruptor. I needed that disruption in order to take the leap of faith, in order for the elevation he had in store for me next.
Someone's listening and hearing that God told you to leave a long time ago. You didn't
Yes, he
leave.
did. He will make things
And
uncomfortable until you listen to what he's trying to tell you, and so and like I said, it became so unbearable. I
Mhm.
was forced to, I had to make a choice,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because people always ask me if I ever would have seen that leader again, or that person, what would you say to that person? And I honestly would tell that person, thank you.
Mm.
And everyone's like, what? I'm like, I would say thank you, because had it not been for the agitation he had caused me to pivot, I wouldn't be where I am today because of that. So,
Ooh, that is so powerful. Because it's not always the devil. It's not always, it's recognizing. I said this last night at a gathering that we had. I said, even when it comes to what the enemy does in our lives, the enemy has to go through God to get permission to even come close to us. And
mm-hmm.
so when we recognize that God is sovereign and that God is governing over the story of our lives, He's the one writing the story. And if we yield to that, that is huge in shifting just how we even handle those. For you to even say that, I would say thank you, says a lot about the healing journey that God has walked you through.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Had you asked me that in the midst of everything, I probably would have had a whole different conversation or some other things to say. But, like I said, we've all gone through storms, and then if
Mhm.
you really take a step back and like for me, I started to connect the dots, and I was like, oh, I get it now, God. I can see what you were doing, because he's always working behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're not going to know what the plans are or what he's working on. We just have to trust him, knowing that, he always has us. He'll never leave or forsake us. And, I mean, I couldn't tell you how I was able to travel, to different countries with no income coming in. Like, it's just, it's only God, And then when I actually ended up with a contract assignment, when I tell you that was only God, because I was on a computer late one night, this opportunity popped up on my computer screen. Within 72 hours, I had a signed contract. That's only God. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I recognize that, and it definitely, I have a very different perspective on, different things that I experience. I even remember interviewing for a role, for it was a 5 month interview process, and they finally called me. I was at a women's conference, and they called me and they were like, "We're not offering you the job, but we have no negative feedback," and I'm like, "Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it." I walked right back into that women's conference unfazed, because I also recognize that, sometimes God does protect us
Mm-hmm.
from specific things as well. And recognizing that the old me would have been crushed, like, "Oh my God, it's me. Something's wrong with me." I just recognize, what it is. And I always look to God for all of the things that I experience.
Wow. So I'm hearing that just like Joseph, there was a journey that you went through. And sometimes that journey of elevation first starts with some downward spirals that it feels like you're going lower and lower and lower, one knock after the other. And in God's due time and in God's way, there is a time of elevation. And when that elevation comes, now God has placed you in these spaces that had you not said yes to him, had you not listened to him, you would not be here. So let's talk about where you are today and these spaces and platforms that God has opened up for you. Um, what is stewarding this space look like?
I would say stewarding the space for me at this point is, it's a couple of different things. I think for me, one is always giving back, for one, right? So for me, I always mentor. And I'll give you a perfect example. My friends always joke that I'm the mayor, or I know if I don't know someone, I know someone that knows someone. And
Mm-hmm.
so if it's an opportunity that I can't do, I'm gonna reach out. Oh, I know Dr. Mirriam Knight. I can't do the opportunity. Let me, give it, pay it forward that way. So I think recognizing that it's also not about me. It's never about me, right? It's always about what God has called me to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I always try to recognize that piece of it as well. But I always try to steward in a way of helping others, in different ways as well, whether it's mentorship, whether it's opportunities, whether it's making a connection. I always try to do those things as well. And so, like I said, it's never about me. It's always about helping women, and how I can support women in that way.
Amen to that. One of the statements you made in the forum was that navigating success can be as difficult as navigating failure.
Absolutely. When we experience failure, it's so easy because, failure requires us to look within. We have, reflection. I feel like success can kind of create comfort. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's important to kind of recognize, the differences in relation to that. You don't ever want to kind of, how do I say, kind of smell yourself or your own press, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? Because it's never about that. If
Mm-hmm.
you're operating in an alignment and purpose of what God has called you to do, it's never about you. And
Yeah.
I think, understanding, without the intentional grounding, without staying focused on God, success can get to your head and it can pull you away from the very values or the things that God has called you to do.
Mm. What are those signs for the woman that is saying, "Okay, I made it. I'm doing the things I wanted to do. I'm living the dream." But those subtle hints of ego, those subtle hints of insecurity or pride, or how do you see that and recognize that, especially in the circles that you walk in right now? I'm pretty sure that you bump into other women who are not stewarding and handling the space that they've been entrusted with that level of integrity and humility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and I think we as women all have been in these spaces. You know, you see always the loudest woman, the boldest woman, the most outspoken woman. You know, and for me, I'm just comfortable in my skin. I don't
Mm.
need to be the loudest woman in the room. I don't even need to be the boldest woman in the room. But if you
Wow.
encounter me, it will be genuine. I've never had a person that I encounter never say that, you know, I always follow through on the things that I say, you know. You know, a lot of times we have women, you know, I've had women that approach me, oh, I can do this for you, and, you know, try to challenge me on certain things. It's never a competition. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I don't feel in competition with any woman at all, because I recognize my space and my lane and my niche and what I bring to the table. And we all have giftings and purpose. There's no need to have that mindset, you know, stepping into a space, because there's plenty to go around for all of us, especially when we're doing this work. And so for me, I just really try to level set, you know, because sometimes you're like, ooh, all these things, amazing things are happening. And so I really just try to reset and reground and just really try to be grateful and have gratitude for the things that come
Mhm.
my way. And it's easy to get distracted. You know, not all contracts are good contracts, you know,
Yes.
not all contracts are aligned with God's assignment or purpose. You know, you're like, ooh, this dollar amount attached to this agreement sounds amazing, but that may not be what it's about. So for me, I just really focus on the work. I try to be my authentic self and genuine with women that I encounter. I
Mhm.
like to think that they sense that when they're in my presence, and that I genuinely want to see them win and thrive and help.
Mm. Yeah.
And if I can't do it, I probably know someone that can, or be the right person to connect them
Mhm.
with. And it's never, like I said, for me, I'm not in competition with other women. You know, and I've come across women like that, you know, with the ego and, you know, this, that, and the other. That doesn't intimidate me because I'm very
Mhm.
solid and confident in who I am in God.
That statement, I am very solid and confident in who I am in God. If we could just grasp that part, the identity part, I know who I am
Mhm.
in God is
Mhm.
key too. Like
And I didn't
that.
always have that. I
Mhm.
honestly, if I'm being honest, I didn't always have that. You know what I mean? I've been in situations where I questioned when I went through the toxic work environment. When I tell you I was so gaslit, I questioned everything, you know, my talents, my skill set, a lot of different things, you know, and I had to level set and reset and like, wait a minute, I need to get back and stand firm on the word of God and who he says I am in him.
Mhm.
And now, like looking back a year and a half later, I am a completely different individual, and I set boundaries, and I'm very firm in who I show up as and my worth. I don't let that falter for anyone or any situation.
Yeah. What are some practices that you intentionally integrate into your life that ensure that you remain grounded, that ensure that you remain level, that ensure that you remain centered on what really matters?
I will say this, my women's group, at church, I have accountability partners. And so my friends all have permission to pull me to the side and have a conversation, an honest, loving
Mhm.
conversation. It may be hard and difficult. Um, those are the types of individuals I want to have, but also, you know, prayer, journaling, you know, trying to stay in continuous relationship with God. And then also around like-minded women, as well. You know, sometimes in the elevation, you will lose friends and people along the way because not everyone is meant to be a part of the next chapter in your book or your journey. And that is something I had to learn the hard
Mhm.
way. But those are some of the ways that I have to stay grounded. I always know when I'm starting to feel a certain type of way. I always ask, am I disconnected from God? You know,
Mm.
and then I recognize, oh, I didn't, I wasn't in the word today. I didn't go to church. I'm not connected with community or like-minded community. And I think that's important too, is being around like-minded community, because they're the ones that are going to pull you out of the fire, or question you when you're, kind of moving away from what God has called you to do or not being obedient.
That is so good. So let's pivot real quick to your framework, the Pivot Well framework, and talk a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit more about what that is and who you serve with that. And I'm going to lean into, towards the end of that, how people can connect with you and the work that you do within the Heal Well Collective and the Pivot Well framework. Um, because I know that there is someone out there that needs what you have.
Yeah, so my Pivot Well framework is basically five key steps or strategies that help women. So P is for pause, the I is for identify, the V is for validate, the O is for optimize, and T is for transform. And so I really just help women with that strategy, that framework, come up with strategies on how they can go through major life transitions, whether it's divorce, I've been through that, death, been through that, trauma, experienced that, I'm a woman in midlife going through perimenopause, so I'm going through that shift, burnout, all of these major life transitions, caregiving, you name it. I really help women come up with strategies to navigate those particular major life transitions. And then we also, I'm a big component of wellness retreats as well. I do those for leaders and high achieving women as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we typically will travel, internationally, in a wellness destination, and we'll have some really transformative work that we do internally. And then we also have a little bit of fun and community as well. And then on the corporate side, I really equip leaders, with strategies for their teams, in order to really create an environment where their team can thrive. In the professional setting as well. And so individuals can get in contact with me through my website, thehealwellcollective.com. I'm on Instagram, The Heal Well Collective. They can also email me at contact@thehealwellcollective.com as well.
Awesome. All of that information will be available in the show notes, y'all. And again, go check out her website. Go make sure that you're plugged into. Do you have any retreats coming up?
I do. So I have two retreats coming up for 2026. So we're going to Tulum, Mexico.
Ooh.
Yes, Tulum, Mexico is one of the destinations. And then we're going to Portugal for 2026. For 2027, we're going to Colombia, the Amalfi Coast, Italy, and Morocco.
Wow. In these retreats that you host, what is the core? First of all, what is the target audience? And like, who is this for? And what is the outcome and the expected outcome of these experiences?
Yes, so every retreat is has a different theme, and it's curated, a different curated theme for every different retreat. The population, or the demographics for the retreats, are typically women 35 and up, basically professional business women, high achieving women, leaders as well. So based off of that curated theme, we'll have strategies and intentions. So I'll give you an example. One of the retreats is based off of perimenopause and menopause, which
Mm-hmm.
is a big major life transition. Previous retreats we've had based off of burnout. So there's different curated themes for the retreat, and I also collaborate and partner with a lot of individuals to create retreats too. So I have done partnerships as well, to come up with different retreats in different parts of the world as well.
Awesome. Those sound so exciting, y'all. Again, the link will be available in the show notes, and I really want you to connect with Daniela and the work that she is doing. Before we close out, just a little bit about the work you do as an ambassador. Tell us a little bit more about that and what that means for you personally in this season of your life.
Um, I think for me, becoming a United Nations Peace Ambassador, it just really allows me to do the work more on a global scale. It's really about the work and not being seen. And so, in this particular season, I'm working with therapists, clinicians, on a large project that's going to be on a global scale. So, more to come on that. But it's really allows me to be a vessel for change more on a global impact than just locally in my community.
That is so amazing. It's also recognizing that these spaces, you said this over and over again. You said it's about the work. You said it over and over again throughout this conversation that it's not about me, that the work that you are doing is impactful, it is legacy, it is what is going to be left behind at the end of the day, that it goes beyond you and this period of time that you get to live in this world. For the woman that is afraid of the spaces and the platforms that God is opening for her. Maybe because she's been told she doesn't want to get a big head, or maybe because she's afraid of the cost, the price that comes with that elevation. Whether it's being misunderstood, whether it's rejection, whether it's betrayal, whether it's the losses of relationships. What would you say to that woman today?
I would say, I think, and I'll just refer back to myself as far as my journey, having experienced that. It's understanding that the very reason you're feeling the stretch is because you're stepping into new capacity,
Mm.
right? And so we have to understand that sometimes God is going to remove certain people out of your life. It doesn't mean you don't love them, it doesn't mean that you don't care for them. It just means that where He's getting ready, where He's growing and stretching you and teaching you, those individuals may not be able to come with you. And so it's understanding. We hear this all the time in church. You know, God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies the
Mm-hmm.
called. And so I think for women is recognizing, don't dim your light or your shine. There's a purpose and a reason for you to step into what He's called you to do based off your story and your journey. We all have a purpose. Some of our purposes cross paths, they're aligned, they're kind of similar. But don't let that be your deterrent, because God is going to give you all of the things that you need. He's going to connect you with the right people. He's going to open the right doors for you, and He's going to stretch you. The stretching is not fun or comfortable. you know, it is not comfortable at all, but you just have to be able to know that, He's doing it for the greater purpose, greater good, to help others. And you're the answer to the problem. That's why you're being stretched.
Mm. This whole conversation has been such a gift. So many jewels, so many nuggets to take away from this. There will be little clips that will come up over the next couple of weeks. If you can't listen to the whole episode, listen to those clips because there's so much goodness that Dr. Daniela gave us today. Thank you so much for reminding us that, again, it's not about the applause, it's not about us, it's about the work, it's about the assignment, it's about being aligned with God's will for our lives. And it's about the impact that we make in obedience to God. And again, that relationship with God, the community that you're with. I heard that over and over again. Just having those people in your life that can check you, the people in your life that can speak into you, the people in your life that can hold you up. You're not meant to walk this journey alone, and the spaces that God has given us, we've got to handle them with so much care. Any final words before we close out?
I would just say this, as you elevate, you have to elevate in silence. Don't always
Ooh.
share all the things that you're doing with everybody, because you're going to have the naysayers, people that are trying to deter you or be negative. And be firm in your boundaries. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. That's part of the healing process. Boundaries are healthy. And I think it's necessary as you start to elevate in this work, and recognizing that your circle or your sphere, your core group of individuals, it might get a little bit smaller, and you just need to be okay with that.
Amen. Thank you so much for today. Y'all, if you love this episode, if you heard anything on this episode that was a blessing to you, that is a blessing to you, that you think can be a blessing to somebody, please share the episode, like, comment, let us know what about this episode impacted you. And please connect with Dr. Daniela through her Pivot Well coaching program, as well as the Heal Well Collective. And check out her retreats. Don't forget that part. Those experiences. We got to see the world, y'all. We got to see the world, but we've also got to see the world and heal well. All of those links will be available in the show notes. So, y'all, if you are ready for God to move you to the next level, and sometimes it's not readiness. I think we heard that quite clearly today. It's sometimes you're not ready, but you walk in obedience anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Take that leap, follow God, be obedient. She said this again today. She said she leaped and she walked into that space without no backup plan. She didn't have a plan B. Her plan was God. And God will remind us that He is our source. We've got to take that leap and step into the spaces that He's calling us to. So until next time, everybody, remember this. Remember that your elevation is not a mistake, that God has entrusted you with this season for a purpose. Lead boldly and stay anchored in the one who has called you for such a time as this. God bless you and see you on the next episode. Take care.